Looking at the history of Western civilization and of the European people, we see such richness and depth. From the wealth of technology, to the discoveries and innovations, the monuments and great works, to the traditions and institutions, the West demonstrates its commitment to the true, the good, and the beautiful. But amidst this vast and complex web of unwritten social order, traditions, and knowledge that make up Western culture, we cannot easily find one single unifying description of the Western strategy for success. Until now. Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, this is In Truth Victorious, and in this video I will share the 8 secrets most responsible for the rise and glory of the West. In fact, they aren't so much secrets as they have simply never been put into clear and concise language ever before. This list of 8 strategies is based on the work of Kurt Doolittle of the Proprietarian Institute, who draws on the work of many other great intellectuals before him to recognize and honor the traditions of our ancestors. This strategy of the West does not need to remain a secret, and now it can be described for all to see. And at the end of this video, I will share how we can ensure the next age of Western greatness. So make sure you watch all the way to the end. Here they are, the 8 secrets of Western success. Excellence and heroism, sovereignty and reciprocity, truth and duty, the jury and markets in every aspect of life. Combined together, this is what we call Western civilization's group evolutionary strategy. It is the foundation of our law, customs, traditions, and philosophies. This is the reason we win. Or more specifically, this is the reason we evolve, adapt, and grow faster than any other civilization. We win because of our ability to outcompete, to innovate, and to transcend. Or to summarize this in one simple phrase, adaptive velocity. How did a small group of people in a small part of the world rise to become the most dominant force on the planet? Well, whether you think it was the will of God, or even if you just think it was random luck, the European people, from prehistoric times all the way to today, have developed a very unique group strategy for survival. The idea of a group evolutionary strategy is rooted in the recognition that in order to survive as human beings, we must work together as groups. You could say that for human beings, evolutionary success is a team sport, and all the major civilizations that have been successful in the world have developed their own unique strategy to make the most of the specific opportunities that they faced. A group evolutionary strategy can also be thought of as that civilization's particular set of best practices. And history shows us that those civilizations that could not or did not evolve either regressed, collapsed, or were conquered. In the team sport of evolution, the West has been winning. We were winning in the Indo-European expansion. We were winning in the Greco-Roman ancient world. And we were winning as Northern Europeans dragged mankind out of ignorance, superstition, poverty, hard labor, disease, child mortality, and early death. Although whether or not we will continue to win is still uncertain. So what is the Western group evolutionary strategy? As a whole, the strategy can be summarized by what Ricardo Duchesne calls aristocratic egalitarianism, a specific type of meritocracy, of rule by those who demonstrate merit among peers. Indo-Europeans were also uniquely ruled by a class of free aristocrats, a state in which the ruler, the king, or the commander-in-chief is not an autocrat who treats the upper classes as unequal servants, but is a peer who exists in a spirit of equality as one more warrior of noble birth. As we go through these 8 secrets of Western civilization, you will see how each one comes from this core of aristocratic egalitarianism. Number 1. Excellence. While other cultures may strive for harmony or balance, or even domination over others, the Western strategy has always been about rising above mediocrity. A culture of excellence rewards people based on merit and revels in the spirit of competition. In the West, what it means to be truly, fully human has long been associated with this restless desire for excellence. This was first measured as excellence in battle, but then also as excellence in ideas, innovation, art, craft, technology, and industry. Excellence is a test of all human action. The craftsmanship, the meaning, the uniqueness, the form, the authenticity. Excellence is the evidence of human time and investment. This deed-oriented man is not satisfied with a Darwinian struggle for existence or a Marxist struggle for economic equality. He wants to climb high, soar upward, and reach ever higher levels of existential intensity. He is not interested in the mere prolongation of his biological existence, with mere adaptation, reproduction, and conservation. He wants to storm into the heavens and shape the world. Number 2, heroism. Heroism consists of taking great risks and potentially bearing great costs in acts of altruism and virtue. Great acts can be heroic even in the case of failure, because it's not so much the outcome that determines heroism. It is the sacrifice in service of the commons. Ricardo Duchesne describes the hero as acting in proud contempt for one's biological survival. Or as Joseph Campbell states, a hero is someone who has given his or her life to something bigger than oneself. This culture of heroism goes back as far as the Indo-Europeans, who rewarded bold and heroic deeds with the attainment of great honor and prestige. This was the ideal of our aristocratic warrior ancestors. While the heroes of Homer's epics zealously chased after honor, recognition, and dominance for their courage and skill, the end result was of benefit to the commons. Indeed, one might even consider it quite a liability to have a bunch of strong men running around trying to make such bold and heroic displays of individual dominance. And chasing prestige may seem like a selfish motive, but this is the important point. The heroic ideal channels that masculine drive for dominance, honor, and victory in battle into altruistic acts that serve the community as a whole. Heroic prestige is the reward for altruistic acts of dominance. You can even think of this like a cultural normative institution. The community exchanges gifts of higher status to those who display courage and bravery. This cultural norm is unique to the West and generates tremendous returns for the commons. One reason the West has excelled. The heroic tradition is our central teaching. Your dominance is an asset to the tribe so long as it is channeled for the tribe's benefit. And if we channel all our men's dominance rather than suppress it, then we are concentrating a scarce and valuable resource into a constant evolutionary cycle. We create a constant stream of predators at the ready, in constant competition with one another, producing constant innovations in war, politics, industry, family, craft, and arts. While other cultures may have heroes, they tend to be more isolated and not as central to the functioning of the larger social structure. This again is reflected in that idea of aristocratic egalitarianism, that strong, brave, and heroic men could be considered peers rather than threats. The hero is also a man of agency, which is to say he is a man who acts rather than reacts, a man capable of making a promise, a man who shapes the world around him rather than submitting to it. This unique development in Western civilization can even be seen in the myths and religion. A shift from sheepish and submissive to heroic and transcendent. This can also be seen as a certain kind of self-awareness, seeing oneself as an actor in the world, of overcoming the animal instincts through mental discipline, which also contributed to the development of Western reason. The culture of heroism produces men of agency, with the power to act for the benefit of the commons. And in turn, this produces even greater benefit for the commons. Number 3, sovereignty. Sovereignty is the monopoly of violence, within a given domain. Individual sovereignty can be thought of as a monopoly over one's own individual life and property. This is the foundational principle of Western civilization from which all else descends, yet it is so often overlooked or misunderstood. People often wonder, is the secret of the West individualism or freedom or dominance or expression? But as I'll show you, none of those words describes the Western spirit quite as well as the word sovereignty. Sovereignty is neither individualist nor collectivist. It's not a freedom that has been granted so much as a right that has been earned. And it's not solely an expression of expansion and dominance because it recognizes the value of cooperation within the group. Rather, sovereignty is the reciprocal protection of all who will fight. So like it or not, it all starts with violence. Okay, if you, as an individual, are going to defend your life and your property, you must fight. And if you're going to be successful against other groups and other tribes, then you must join your own group or your own tribe to fight alongside with. You must confederate. And if you're going to join a group, then you must compromise. You must accept some limits on your actions. You can't be free in some utopian sense, like a child who can do whatever he wants. What limitation must you accept? The only solution among violent men of agency who want to both remain sovereign and to confederate is reciprocal insurance of sovereignty, which means I've got your back if you've got mine. It's my duty to ensure your sovereignty, and it's your duty to ensure my sovereignty. And we accept the limits of reciprocity as limits on our actions so that we can be successful as a group. Put differently, sovereignty is the right of the individual to act as the law and legislature in his own family's affairs. The family being like a microcosm of the state or nation in which the man is both king, legislature, and army. Sovereignty is the cooperative egalitarianism of violent men. Sovereignty is the cult of non-submission, the power to deny power. Sovereignty is produced by one means, and one means only, the organized application of violence by a sufficient percentage of ordinary men to prevent any and all alternative conditions. Whether this is a local militia or a band of warriors, a group of men with sufficient numbers and sufficient arms cannot be deprived of their sovereignty. And because of their investment in this strategy and all of the advantages that come with it, they have the incentive to continue preserving and protecting their sovereignty. This tradition goes as far back as the Bronze Age Indo-Europeans. In this martial culture, war bands were freely formed, not based on tribal or kinship ties, but based on merit. Any warrior who had demonstrated his strength in battle, his heroism, could contractually organize a band of warriors. The leader was not considered a dictator, but he was considered the first among equals. They raided for profit, and the volunteers would take an oath of loyalty to the leader in exchange for their share of the rewards from successful raids. This military strategy of hunting and raiding for profit was risky and required considerable personal investment. So demonstrated success in battle and the ability to keep one's promise became more important than tribal or kinship ties. This arrangement was fundamentally meritocratic and fundamentally preserved the sovereignty of each man to be king in his own domain. Participation was voluntary and reciprocal, and this egalitarianism among peers provided the incentive for men to cooperate and compromise. Likewise, a leader who was not providing the sovereignty of peers was not providing the incentive to cooperate, and so he might be abandoned or killed. Tyranny was not tolerated. This reaction against despotism and tyranny is such a common theme throughout the history of the West, with examples from the assassination of Julius Caesar to the Magna Carta limiting the powers of King John to the American fight for independence. It can be seen in feudal arrangements of sovereignty by consent, where the king was still a peer among the aristocracy. And it can be seen in the constitutional monarchies and constitutional republics that further limit the powers of any given individual. In America today, we often hear this rally cry of freedom as our core value, but a better description would be sovereignty, because our country was founded by violent men who were unwilling to submit to compulsion. Sovereignty is even represented in the tradition of the duel, in which two men represent king of their own domains, going to war with each other, fighting over what they believe is just. Sovereignty arose in the Indo-European expansion and was unique to the West. The Greeks and Romans institutionalized it. In medieval Europe, it was extended to a middle class, and in modern times, it was even extended to all. But not everyone wants or is even capable of sovereignty. So this experiment of the aristocracy of everyone has failed. Sovereignty is fundamental to the uniqueness of the West. It is based on fundamental rules of cooperation, which means rule of law, or the rule of reciprocity. Every man who is granted sovereignty is also obligated to defend sovereignty and to defend the commons. This requires investment, and that means that every man must fight. If one fails to fight, one fails to fulfill this contract of reciprocity. Every man is a warrior, a craftsman, a sheriff, a judge, and a sovereign, and warranties all his peers in the distributed dictatorship of sovereign men. A sovereign cannot even surrender his rights, because in doing so, he dismisses his responsibility and violates reciprocity. To be sovereign is both a privilege and a duty. Anyone who takes these rights without fulfilling their responsibilities is a parasite and is free-riding on the violence of others. Likewise, sovereignty must be earned, and the costs are great. And given that sovereigns are small in number, distributing these responsibilities as wide as possible helps reduce those costs. Therefore, entrance into the aristocracy is open and available for all who demonstrate both desire and ability. Entrance is not suppressed, but is encouraged based on merit and one's ability to fulfill one's duty. This is Western civilization. The choice of sovereignty once made produces all that we have done. Sovereignty leads to a meritocratic distribution of property. Sovereignty leads to contractualism and reciprocity, and therefore also to truthful testimony. This emphasis on demonstrated military success also leads to that more accurate understanding of the physical world that we call science. And the reciprocal insurance of peers between sovereigns promotes trust, which reduces friction within the group. Neither completely individualistic nor collectivist, sovereignty allows us to reap the rewards of reciprocal cooperation while submitting to no one. Number 4, reciprocity. You're probably familiar with a common expression of reciprocity known as the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. This basic intuition of give and take goes back very far in human history. But reciprocity is not just a moral intuition that helps us feel good about ourselves. It is a fundamental requirement for cooperation to exist. Therefore, we say it is the law of cooperation, like a physical law of nature. I've also created another video entirely on this one topic, titled "This is How Cooperation Works." So if you want more information on that, check the link below. And I also recommend John Mark's excellent video titled "Reciprocity, the Right Wing's Moral Authority." Again, follow the link below. Reciprocity can be summarized as follows: the requirement that we limit our actions to productive, fully informed, warranted, voluntary transfers, free of the imposition of costs upon others by externality. Once again, productive, fully informed, and voluntary. No shady business here. Free of impositions of costs on others by externality, which means you can't dump your problems onto me. And very importantly, warranted, because if you mess up, you have to pay restitution. As mentioned previously, reciprocity arises out of the necessity for cooperation among sovereign men. Reciprocity provides the means for dispute resolution. Who is right and who is wrong can be determined by measurements of reciprocity, and reciprocity must be maintained, or else we lose the incentive to cooperate. Therefore, we can also say that morality is defined by reciprocity, insofar as morality is that set of actions which preserves and extends cooperation within a group. A culture may develop all kinds of moral intuitions or moral norms, but only reciprocity prevents cycles of retaliation and provides the incentive to cooperate. Using reciprocity to resolve disputes also means that we need some kind of understanding of property and economics. In those early warbands that I described earlier, we can see that an individual warrior may be sovereign over his own domain, but he is capable of imposing costs on others. If a warrior lied or failed in his duty, property could be lost or everyone could be killed. So once again, reciprocity provides us the means of calculating who has suffered damages and who is at fault. The golden rule, as mentioned previously, provides us with a rough estimate of the rule of reciprocity. But it can also be stated in the negative as the silver rule. Don't do unto others what you wouldn't have done unto you. The positive version tells us what we should do, while the negative version tells us what we shouldn't do. This will come up again when we discuss the jury and markets, but the negative version provides us with the prohibitions on things that we cannot do. And this becomes the basis for law. The restrictions under law open up the freedom for the market, in which we can choose those goods and services that we do want done for ourselves or done unto others. But more on that in a bit. There exists only one universal moral law of sentient beings: reciprocity. And it has been written since the dawn of writing. Number 5. Truth. Imagine again those early warbands of the past, and imagine how important it would have been at the time to have truthful reporting of facts. This martial testimony, getting the facts straight when they really matter, is what set the foundation for the empirical mind that has become the hallmark of the West. But it's important to understand what we mean by truth. We aren't talking about some ultimate or absolute truth in the abstract. Similarly, I'm not talking about perfect or complete knowledge, because no one has perfect and complete knowledge. Instead, truthfulness refers to a property of speech. Is my statement truthful or not? And what this means, truthfulness, is that a statement has been cleansed of error, lies, deceit, ignorance, superstition, wishful thinking, and bias. Is our speech logical and possible? Does it correspond to reality? Is it complete and coherent? These are some of the questions that we have to answer in order to give our promise that we are speaking the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Truthful speech really comes down to a need for decidability and predictability. In a case of battle, for instance, I don't care about the absolute truth. I care, is your statement true enough so that if I act on it, I will get the results that you say will happen? But speaking truthfully can actually be quite difficult, because it means you have to know what you're talking about. And this leads to the development of science as a way of testing our statements. We test our statements for falsehood. And only the West has produced this method of laundering one's speech of error, bias, wishful thinking, and lies. If you want more details on this, check out another one of my videos titled Restoring the West. Truth is enough. Truth, then, is a strategy of high investment, high reward. The Western strategy is to pursue truth at all costs. That includes costs to status, wealth, health, reputation, or life. The truth can hurt, but that is the price we pay for the ability to adapt, grow, and innovate in ways that pay off far greater returns in the long run. Only the West has normalized this culture of truth before face, regardless of cost. And only the West has institutionalized it. The entirety of our way of life rule of law, sovereignty, reciprocity, and jury, and the reason, science, and technology that arose from it, are dependent upon the one thing Western men do that no other people do, and that is to report and report alone by speaking martial, empirical, testimonial truth before face, anyone's face, regardless of cost to self or others. This is the highest cost an individual can pay for his civilization. Number 6. Duty. As mentioned earlier, the rule of reciprocity requires that if we want our rights, we must fulfill our responsibilities. If we look again at that Indo-European warband, we would realize that every member of that group must fulfill their duties in order for the raids to be successful. Every member must fulfill their role, to hold their position. The failure of even the lowest member to fulfill their duty could be incredibly costly. Excellence, then, does not require that one be at the top of the hierarchy, but only that wherever one is within the hierarchy, one does one's job with excellence. In fact, you must know your station and not try to be higher on the hierarchy than you actually are. You can't try to be something that you're not, because otherwise you could compromise the entire formation. You can think of this like a pack strategy, similar to a pack of wolves going on a hunt. Duty must be fulfilled regardless of consequences to self or family. And this duty to serve the commons is the fulfillment of reciprocity. Even the most ruggedly independent individuals still requires the protection of a group to resist opponents, and therefore they must bear the costs of the privileges they receive. Any man who does his martial, civil, industrial, and familial duty, regardless of class, clan, or rank, has earned his peerage. Any man who does not, has not. Each must bear the costs of his individual role, and there are no free riders. And each will have a role according to the division of labor, skills, and talents. For example, men are beasts of burden and must endure cellular damage and physical harm as their cost that they must pay into the commons, while women bear the costs of bearing and raising children. So while the strategy of truthful speech requires that one's speech serves the commons, duty requires that one's acts serve the commons. Every man fulfills his role as a warrior, as a sheriff, and as a reciprocal insurer, and then every man is sovereign. Number 7. The jury. While the exact origin of what we consider the modern jury may not be entirely known, we can at least trace it back to roughly the time of the Norman invasion of England in 1066. Prior to that, however, there was a tradition of resolving disputes through a group of peers, which was known as the assembly, or the thing. Regardless of the origin, the specific point about judgment being passed by a group of peers should immediately seem similar to that idea of aristocratic egalitarianism, sovereignty and egalitarianism among warriors. And this idea of judgment passed by a group of peers is even what expanded into modern ideas of senate or houses. The purpose of resolving disputes was to prevent the externalization of harm from any in-group conflict into the group and onto the commons as a whole. If every sovereign man is both a sheriff and a judge, it is his duty to participate in resolving disputes. This is noticeably different from judgment passed by an authority, by command or decree. And even in the tradition that I mentioned earlier of the duel, one's sovereignty over one's own domain is still maintained. The jury then is meant to be independent from the conflict. And the size of the jury is meant to prevent bribery and corruption. The more members of the jury, the higher the cost of bribery. A jury of peers is also capable of judging an individual based on the norms of the society that they're in. Law, of course, is part of culture, and so a jury is capable of deciding based on their understanding of what they would do in those same circumstances. This requires a largely moral population, however, and so not every civilization is going to be capable of this method of judgment. The jury is also a defense against what might be the hubris of any single individual or a single group, what we might think of as vigilante justice. Getting a dozen men together to hang someone from a tree is very different from killing someone vengefully. If death is sanctioned, then appeal exists. Hubris and error are limited. What we seek to limit is unsanctioned deaths, without appeal, uninsured against hubris and error. If you act without sanction, you are a risk to the group. If you act with sanction, you reduce group risk. Even though the peer review process of science may now be somewhat corrupt, it's still a reflection of this intended purpose of judgment passed by a group of peers. In science, just as in the courtroom, people give their truthful testimony of the facts as they see them, and a group of peers investigate it for truthfulness, repeatability, and correspondence with the actual world. Thus, the scientific method, developed by the lawyer and scientist Francis Bacon, emerged out of Western customary law. The prosecutor, like the experimenter, attempts to falsify the statements being made to determine which ones are truthful enough to act on. So this process of review by a group of peers provides even more velocity for arriving at the truth. Number 8. Markets in everything. While the jury provides a place for resolving conflict, the market provides a place for voluntary cooperation. We can define a market as a place in which people exchange goods and services based on the division of labor, knowledge, talent, skills, and so on. And the result is many-fold. Incentive to serve others. The market provides an incentive for serving the needs and desires of other people cooperatively to achieve a diversity of different goals. Rational calculation. The market provides a possibility for the rational calculation of production, which means producers have a very sensitive way of measuring how much a product is going to be worth at market value according to changing prices. Changing prices convey knowledge about market demand. Innovation. Markets lead to innovation through competition, through ever more opportunities to produce better, more efficient, higher quality products. Reduction of prices. Because of the specialization of labor and the competition for market share, prices drop and more goods are available for cheaper. This cycle of innovation and competition never reaches an endpoint or a final destination. Instead, it mimics nature in that constant power and drive to adapt and to evolve. Markets are like the engine driving the adaptive velocity of the West. And once again, we can go back to see the foundation for markets and everything as arising out of sovereignty. If you remember, sovereignty limits the actions of individuals to the non-imposition of costs. You can't impose costs on me, and I can't impose costs on you. And this leads to the incremental suppression of imposed costs. Incremental means that we suppress the largest costs first, such as murder or armed robbery, and then incrementally suppress more and more costs to shape and form the market. For example, a market must be free of thieves, liars, and charlatans, essentially forcing people into voluntary cooperation. The rule of law of reciprocity forces people to cooperate through markets. Again, it's this prohibition on the bad that forces people toward the good. And this prohibition on the bad is what we refer to as via negativa. This is basically a fancy word coming from the Latin that means that we eliminate the negative and what remains is either neutral or positive. The law works via negativa by punishing crimes, and what remains are markets. Even science works via negativa by eliminating falsehoods, and what remains is truthful speech. This method of elimination via negativa is pretty amazing when you think about it. All we need to do is eliminate the bad, and people use their own ingenuity and creativity to come up with goods that we would have otherwise thought of as unimaginable. We never know the truth, the good, the moral, the just. We only know their opposites. This is significantly different from via positiva law, which basically attempts to create goods by command. For example, you can think of the totalitarian communist governments that had the hubris to think they could plan out an entire economy, that they could tell a farmer how much wheat to produce. And look at what happened there. Breadlines, famines, starvation. Instead, the market's only defined by what you can't do. And the natural process of meritocratic competition leads to optimal outcomes. They say, whatever doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. And this process of competition, the process which rewards merit, innovation, working in service of others, and voluntary cooperation, this process makes us stronger and allows us to adapt to changes faster. So what does markets in everything mean? Everything? Yes, everything. Wherever we have sovereignty, we create markets. And wherever we have markets, we create optimums, markets in association. If I find a group of people that aligns with my values and my interests, I can choose to associate with them. And if I find a group of degenerates that I don't like, I don't have to associate with them either. Markets in reproduction. I can choose my mate, and I can choose whether or not I even want to have children, but I can only choose based on my own sexual market value. Markets for cooperation, competition for interpersonal or social groups. Markets for production, the typical idea of a market for commercial purposes. Markets for commons. For example, people are going to move to a city that chooses to take care of its streets and its parks and its neighborhood. And the market of nations, including the market for attracting good people to live in your country, or the market for warfare and defense. And this highlights that even a nation must adapt to the demands of the market if they are going to outcompete the others. This is why we say markets in everything, meritocracy in every aspect of life. And meritocracy leads to optimums. Markets in everything leads to what is referred to as a Pareto optimum. If you're unfamiliar, Pareto was an Italian economist in the late 1800s and early 1900s. A Pareto optimum, or Pareto efficiency, refers to a situation in which resources are allocated so that no single person could become better off without another person becoming worse off. But this is not equality. It doesn't mean that everyone gets an equal share or that each receives according to their needs. And it doesn't mean that everyone is perfectly satisfied either. It's not some kind of utopia, but instead it's an optimum balance between everybody's different individual preferences. And it's also not a static state, as the market is constantly shifting, changing, and evolving with a constant shifting and changing of resources. So the market is like a calculator that organizes all this information and knowledge about every individual's specific preferences and organizes it into an optimal distribution. One of the great functions of this process is that we can come together as a bunch of different people with different desires and a diversity of goals, and we can work together voluntarily for the fulfillment of each individual's preferences. Cooperation in means leads to a diversity in ends, and the market achieves what can't be achieved by democracy or authority. Democracy can work in a group of people with similar preferences or similar goals. It's a simple way of polling a group and prioritizing the different preferences. But democracy can't be used to resolve conflict. And when democracy is used among different groups that have different goals and different ethics, then one group inevitably will impose its will on the other. Likewise, authority may be successful in resolving a conflict through a relationship of dominance and submission, through command, but it doesn't allow for the creativity of voluntary cooperation. Only markets tolerate this diversity of goals and ethics and values while still maintaining the incentive for voluntary cooperation. And in situations where people don't have a choice through the market through voluntary means, then they must resort to using the government to dominate, like in the case of democracy, where political activism or even immigration or redrawing the boundaries of a voting bloc leads to a situation where one group can become the majority and dominate over the minority. Markets rely on using natural law, the law of reciprocity, to resolve differences. And natural law relies on sovereignty, the aristocracy. But not everyone can compete in the market, so there will always be people who resort to parasitism, theft, and corruption. Parasitism must be suppressed, and when parasitism is suppressed, people are forced into cooperation through the market. The strategy as a whole. So once again, these are the 8 strategies for Western success. Excellence and heroism, sovereignty and reciprocity, truth and duty, the jury, and markets and everything. And as you've probably noticed by now, each one is very intimately connected with all the others. Sovereignty requires that people are bound by the law of reciprocity. Reciprocity requires us to both tell the truth and to fulfill our duty. Those who fulfill their duty and defend sovereignty are rewarded with the status of heroes. To maintain sovereignty of individuals and to uphold the law of reciprocity, justice is served by the jury, and maintaining this order leaves no other choice but voluntary cooperation through markets. The entire strategy produces excellence, the continuous striving for greatness in competition. Another way to think of it is like excellence and heroism provide the aesthetic. The legal and political structure is built on sovereignty and reciprocity, which is determined by the jury, which requires truth before face and duty before self or family. This is defended by the jury and leads to the optimal outcomes through the market. As you can see, the entire strategy works together as a whole. Or we can start with the oath. I shall not lie, steal, or show cowardice in battle, or may you strike me dead. The oath represents a basic building block of cooperation. To make an oath requires truthfulness of speech and defines the limits of one's duty. And the oath is also like a contract, so it must be bound by the limits of reciprocity, voluntary, productive, fully informed, warranted, and free of imposition of costs on others. The reciprocal insurance represented by the oath is what creates sovereignty. And when we punish violations of the oath, then we force people into markets. All of this results in the continuous production of agency. Agency meaning the ability to act and exert power. Agency as distributed throughout the population, rather than one authority who dominates over others. The West actually produces people with agency rather than producing submission. And this is essential because then you have people who are capable of ensuring your sovereignty. Anyone lacking agency becomes dependent on others for defense. And while agency may exist independent of reciprocity, it's through the voluntary exchange of people with agency that sovereignty is formed. So here's a very simple way to think about it. Excellence and heroism, great outcomes and great acts. Sovereignty and reciprocity, the monopoly of control and the corresponding limits of exchange. Truth and duty, promise and responsibility. Jury and markets, decidability of bads through the jury and decidability of goods through the market. The militia. It all starts with the militia. Our ancestors combined horse, wheel, and bronze. They evolved entrepreneurial warfare for profit. Entrepreneurial warfare for profit is voluntary and risky. Men must be recruited for voluntary warfare, and profits must be distributed meritocratically, or one cannot recruit men. One must give an oath ensuring his fellows, One must hold formation or plan regardless of risk. One may not defect or show cowardice, and one must report, testify truthfully, or all may die. This combination of bronze, horse, and wheel dates back to the early Indo-Europeans from about the range of 2500 BC to 1200 BC. This technological advance led to a fully militarized polity, profiting from warfare and raiding. They used these traditions of contractual, entrepreneurial warfare to conquer all of Northern Europe and even expand into Southern Europe. These traditions were later rebuilt in Greece and Rome and throughout Europe from Scandinavia to Russia. Centuries later, when faced with trade barricades through the Middle East, Europeans then developed the Age of Sail and discovered the world, colonizing and profiting from the new resources. The secret of the West, besides being a small, relatively poor population, was the voluntary militia. Heroic sovereignty, leading to contractualism, leading to natural law, and markets in everything. It is founded on this entrepreneurial militia. High investment and high reward, requiring strict adherence to reciprocity to increase trust and decrease costs. The militia was self-funded, but allowed individuals to maintain control over their own share of the proceeds. It was a voluntary militia, because men were not coerced into fighting, but only reciprocity gave the incentive to cooperate. It was a militia of duty, because each man had to hold formation regardless of rank. It was a contractual militia, bound by reciprocity, relying on the truth, with disputes resolved by reliance only on the facts. It was a meritocratic militia, with each individual earning status, rewards, and prestige based on their own success in battle. And therefore it was also eugenic in the sense that it was breeding excellence into the population. It was a heroic militia, redirecting the expression of dominance into the production of benefits for the commons. It was a scientific militia, using the technology and tactics of adaptability, maneuver, and speed to outcompete other groups. It was a distributed militia, each man a sovereign and a king over his own domain, ensured by the others in the group. Rule of law between men, not over men. And it was a militia of agency, because only people of agency are capable of creating and maintaining sovereignty. It's not just a strategy that welcomes agency, but it's a strategy that actively creates it. So we have to ask, if not the militia, what other group could produce all this? This is why we win wars and why others do not. This is why we created a culture with the least amount of lies and falsehoods, and with the fastest rate of adaptation to change. And this is why we can maximize the fully informed, voluntary, productive exchange that happens in markets. And so we say that the primary advantage of the West is adaptive velocity. We're not necessarily the first, but we're the fastest. We adapt, we respond, we innovate. And the reason is simple. This strategy creates the optimum for calculating change, providing incentives for continuous improvement, and distributing decision-making down to the lowest possible level, the heroic individual. We developed markets in everything because markets adapt faster and innovate faster than all alternatives. And for a small population of people, the use of excellence and technology and markets is simply faster in all dimensions than all larger and slower alternatives. By developing markets, we don't limit our people by commanding what they should do. We only limit what they cannot do, allowing innovation to fill market demand. Most tribes do the opposite by creating rules for obedience, submission, and repetition. And this only maintains a static condition rather than the ability to adapt and evolve. Even in the market for law, we can use a scientific approach to produce rapid suppression of violations in reciprocity, allowing us to quickly adapt to new innovations in parasitism. Altogether, this strategy leads to continuous evolution and improvement, lifting men out of their condition as animals and beasts into something more like the gods that we've imagined. The Reformation. The militia does not exist only in history books. We are living in a time where once again we must maneuver and adapt to defeat our enemies. These traditions were developed over thousands of years, leading to the first written form of the U.S. Constitution. But we know more now than our founding fathers did, and we have the science to understand group evolution and the uniqueness of the West. The growing science of what we call propertarianism completes the Enlightenment. It completes the process of putting the Western strategy into written form. And propertarianism also provides solutions. Bring heroism back to religion and myth, drawing in men of great quality and giving them the opportunity to bear great responsibility. Restore masculinity and the militia as the foundations of sovereignty and as a counter to the excess of tolerance which has been our weakness. To wield the sword of truth by fixing the mistake of free speech and demanding free, truthful speech, and punish those who would undermine the West by using lies, pseudoscience, and deceit. Decentralize. Collapse the power distance and distribute power so that every man is a sheriff, a king, a judge, and a warrior. And while I'm American and I'm partial to the European Western tradition of my ancestors, this technology, these 8 secrets of the West, are actually available for anyone who is capable of using it. It was developed by Europeans, and only Europeans could have invented it. But that does not mean that others cannot copy it. Any group which successfully uses the strategies outlined here will be benefited by the adaptive velocity that it rewards. It was heroism and sovereignty that came to Europe from the Indo-European expansion that led to the greatness of Greece and Rome, that rescued us from the last dark age. It is heroism and sovereignty that pulled us out of poverty, disease, and ignorance into the modern age of luxury. But will we get dragged into another dark age? Will you choose the sovereignty of the warrior, or will you choose the servility of the subject? Excellence and heroism, sovereignty and reciprocity, truth and duty, the jury and markets and everything. This strategy provides us the adaptive velocity needed to control our destiny. We have named it, we have written it down, we will defend it. And this strategy will carry us forward for many thousands of years to come. Thanks for watching. If you care about protecting the unique culture of the West, then be sure to share this video and spread the word. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, send an email to your mom, and take a look at my other videos to learn more.